Hey everyone, welcome to our podcast, JPAG, Judicial Power Above Ground. I'm Joanna.
I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Anna.
Today we're going to be talking about judiciary power across the history of the United States.
Well, let's get started.
Nowadays, the Supreme Court has ultimate power to decide whether a law is constitutional or not. It has made monumental decisions that have permanently altered the course of American history and politics. However, it was not always this way. Today, we're going to be focusing on how the Supreme Court's power has grown and changed over time.
Originally, the Supreme Court did not have a lot of power. They could not preside over state decisions and moved across the country in a circuit. It was not until the Marshall Court that it became the Supreme Court we know today.
The first major case that was presented in the Marshall Court was Marbury v. Madison in 1803. In short, this case was between William Marbury, who was supposed to be appointed Justice of Peace in the District of Columbia, and James Madison, Secretary of State. Marbury was supposed to receive a commission papers telling him that he was appointed, but by Madison's fault, he never received the papers. The thing is, though, that this happened to 3 other people. As a result, they went to court.
Finally, a decision was made and Madison was found guilty. The important part of this case, and really the first big decision made through judiciary power, was the principle of judicial review. In essence, the court now had power to declare a law unconstitutional. This was a major increase in the power of the court.
Yeah, the Marbury v. Madison case was a defining moment in the history of the Supreme Court. It was arguably the biggest expansion of power in U.S. history. During this time period, the U.S. expanded its power over the states as well.
This is definitely seen in the McCulloch v. Maryland case from 1819. Here we see the Maryland government trying to ignore the federal taxes on the national bank.
The Maryland government tried to override the national charter for a national bank and claimed that they had the right to ignore federal laws.
The Baltimore branch's cashier, James McCulloch, refused to pay taxes. In a unanimous decision, the court ruled in favor of the federal government.
The verdict was a unanimous decision in favor of the federal government. The decision not only decided that the federal government had the power and right to set up a federal bank, but also that the states did not have the power to tax the federal government.
The court also said that Congress had the federal power to incorporate the bank. The decision also said that Maryland and any other state could not tax instruments of national government. It also proved that federal power presided over the states.
It's really important to note that this case changed things in the United States. The Supreme Court decided that Congress had implied powers derived from those in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution.
Let's skip ahead with the Dred Scott case in 1857.
Yes, this was a big case furthering and proving the power of the judiciary system. The case came about when an African-American slave by the name of Dred Scott, who was living in Illinois, which was a free state.
He soon returned to Missouri, which was a slave state. Scott believed that because of his residence in Illinois that he would be a free man. He filed suit against the Missouri court for his freedom. However, he lost.
And after his loss, he brought about another suit to the federal court, but here he also lost. The decision was ruled 7-2 majority in favor of the government. The decision upheld slavery in the U.S. and also denied the legality of African American citizenship. Furthermore, the case declared that the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional.
In essence, the decision made so that free blacks in the North could never be considered citizens of the U.S. along with their rights. Further, the decision held that neither the territorial government nor the Congress had the power to ban slavery. The right of popular sovereignty was unfeasible.
This decision, and really decisions like these, had the nation in shock. The North was extremely upset about this decision. Many Northerners believed that slavery was morally wrong, and in addition, many of them feared that by slavery spreading, it would take away job opportunities for them in the North, for laborers, farm jobs, and other, especially in the West.
Going to 1868 after the Civil War, when the 14th Amendment was ratified, this was a huge turning point for judicial power, as it proved that states could not deny any person process of the law or equal protection of the laws, even African Americans.
This would later set the basis for more sweeping judicial power, including the Brown v. Board of Education decision, but we'll talk about that later on.
Anyways, the 14th Amendment granted everyone who was born in the United States citizenship. Furthermore, this amendment provided equal protection under the law, ultimately extending the provision of the Bill of Rights to the states.
Over the past 100 years, there was a major increase in power of the courts over the states and executive branch, which continued with the FDR court packing plan scandal.
In order to prevent his New Deal legislation from being declared unconstitutional in the courts, Franklin Roosevelt attempted to add more justices that would favor his side. He even took it as far as to wanting a new judge for every current judge over the age of 60, which would nearly double the justices.
Yeah, the people, and especially the courts, were really outraged by this. They saw it as a blatant attempt to expand federal power. So FDR's proposal, while it was denied, it had its benefits. The justices were scared by his attempt and started to uphold more New Deal legislation.
This isn't the first time that there has been outrage over the Supreme Court decisions and involvements. The Brown v. Board of Education decision faced a lot of pushback.
Yeah, when the Supreme Court decided that separate but equal is no longer constitutional, Southern schools closed their doors. Even the school in Topeka, Kansas closed. And the schools that did stay open either didn't integrate or were the centers of violence, like the school that the Little Rock Nine attended. The Little Rock Nine were harassed on their way to school every day by angry, violent mobs.
Despite all this outrage, though, the Supreme Court upheld its decision. And that, I think, is what is so important about the Supreme Court. They are really, truly the final word. They will use their power of judicial review fairly, despite outrage and other American opinions.
Yeah, and the Supreme Court's opinions can change with times as well. We saw earlier that in the Dred Scott case and the Plessy v. Ferguson case, the Supreme Court had ruled in favor of the states, but only 100 years later they overturned their decision and ruled in favor of the federal government.
Yeah, to talk about today, the Supreme Court just recently overturned their Roe v. Wade decision.
Back in January of 1973, Roe v. Wade was passed for the first time into the Supreme Court, ultimately protecting a woman's constitutional right to choose. This was a huge decision in the 70s because it not only furthered the judicial power, but also further separated church from the state. The church believes against abortions. Meanwhile, the state is passing laws that will make it legal.
And on top of all of this, the country is still fighting in the Vietnam War, and there are protests all over the country to get soldiers out of the war.
Because there is a religious aspect to this decision, this is why it's so highly debated all over the world and why it is so controversial. From citizens to high Supreme Court justices, people have debated this topic since the late 1900s to today.
In 2022, the Roe v. Wade decision was on the fence, and everyone was talking about it, debating it. This case, Dobbs v. Jackson's Women's Health Organization, was ongoing for months. Eventually, the verdict was reached, and the Supreme Court ended with a 5-4 vote, which ended the right to abortion.
Much of the country was upset. They believed that it was unfair, and they questioned how the decision could be overturned when the Constitution hadn't changed since the original decision was reached. Even though the Supreme Court said that having an abortion is unconstitutional because it violates a fetus's inherent rights, states are able to decide if they want to make abortion illegal in their states.
The states deciding is also controversial because many think that the Supreme Court should have the final say.
Yeah, that's true, but many also feel that there are certain circumstances and factors that should allow the state to make it so abortion is legal, but only in those specific states, such as rape or jeopardizing the mother's health.
I think it all goes back to the religion against state conflict. Many feel very strongly about their religion, and therefore the whole debate becomes a huge conversation, and even though the decision was reached just last year, many are still debating it.
Another huge case today is the entire thing going on with Donald Trump and him being put on trial and possibly in jail. This is similar to Nixon in the sense that Nixon was the only other president to be put in front of the Supreme Court and be faced with criminal charges.
Yeah, and I think what we really saw there is that it was like a test of the power of the Supreme Court to prosecute the government, because this is really the first time we've seen like impeachment charges and a president go on trial. So although Nixon, and although we don't know what Trump tried to do, Nixon, he tried to hire different prosecutors just so that he could get off scotch-free, and the Supreme Court would not put up with that.
I also think it goes back to system of checks and balances, because even though like Nixon thinks like what he's doing is like either he thinks it's best for the entire country, or he just like he doesn't want to have to face the charges, and he wants to do what's best for him, then, and he thinks he has the power to do that. And he does to some extent make decisions, but there's always going to be the Supreme Court there to be like, no, you actually can't do that. And even though you think it's best for the country, we find it different. And so it just goes back to that whole system where they're able to put in their word, and like they really do have a good portion of the decision of what's being made.
That was a great conversation, guys.
Yeah.
We'll see you next time on JPAG.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.